Arizona Territory, 1879. The wind howled low through the Red Rock Canyon, and the only sign of life was a woman kneeling in the dirt with blood on her skirt and a child in her arms. "Please," she whispered, voice cracked from thirst, eyes fixed on something distant that was not there. Rowena Langley had not moved from that spot in 2 days. Her husband had left her there. Left her in the canyon with their 2 sons, a cracked canteen, and the lie that he would be back by sundown. That was 4 days ago. Little Warren, only 5, lay curled beneath a threadbare quilt nearby, his cheeks sunken, lips dry. Beside him, Wyatt, just 3, whimpered in his sleep. Their breaths were shallow. Rowena had run out of milk. The river was too far to carry them both. She had not cried. Not when she watched her husband ride away. Not when the food ran out. Not even when the sun set again and again without him returning. But she cried now, because she knew they would not survive another night. And then came the sound. Hooves against stone. The crunch of boots. She turned her head, barely able to lift it, and saw a man step down from a chestnut gelding. Dust clung to his coat and hat, and a rifle was slung across his back. He moved slowly, eyes scanning the canyon wall, then focusing on her and the boys. He crouched, pulled off his hat, and frowned. What happened here? Rowena tried to speak, but her throat gave only a rasp. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a flask. His hand was steady as he tipped it to her lips. "Just sips," he said. "We'll take it slow." She drank. Water. Cold and clean. Enough to make her eyes sting with relief. "My boys," she rasped. He looked to the children and crouched beside them. He touched Wyatt's forehead, then Warren's pulse. His jaw tightened. "I'll get them on the horse," he said. "We need to get out of this canyon before nightfall." "Do not leave us," she whispered, grabbing his coat weakly. "I will not," he said. "Name's Weston Whitlow. You are safe now, I promise you that." He moved with calm purpose, lifting each boy gently and securing them in the saddle. Then he came back for her. "I can walk," she murmured. "You are not walking." "You are near dead." He wrapped her in his coat and lifted her like she weighed nothing. His arms were warm. "Steady." She let herself lean into him. For the first time in days, the shaking stopped. They rode out of the canyon slow and careful, the sun dropping behind the cliffs. Weston led the horse by foot, keeping one hand on her leg to make sure she stayed upright. "Where were you headed?" he asked. "My husband said there was a town west." "What is his name?" She hesitated. "Clive Langley." Weston paused. "That name sounds familiar." She looked at him, but his face was unreadable. He said nothing else until they reached a small cabin nestled in a grove of cottonwoods just off the trail. Smoke curled from the chimney. "This is yours?" she asked. "It is. Built it myself." Inside it was warm, simple but clean. A fire crackled in the hearth. He laid the boys on a cot and tucked wool blankets around them. Then he helped her sit by the fire. He brought broth in a tin cup, and she drank slowly while he checked on her sons. "They will be all right," he said softly. "Weak, but they will come back strong. They need food. Rest." She looked at him carefully. His face was rough with stubble and sun, but his eyes were kind. "Steady." He moved like a man who had seen trouble and did not flinch from it. "Why did you help us?" she asked. He shrugged. "Because you needed it. You do not know me. Do not need to. But it is dangerous. I could be anyone." "Yes," he said, "but you are not." He pulled a stool near the fire and sat with his hat in his hands. "2 nights ago," he said, "I was riding through these hills when I found a man with a broken wagon axle and a busted lip. Said his wife ran off with the children. Said she was not right in the head." Rowena's stomach turned. "He was lying," she whispered. "I figured as much." She looked at Weston, her voice raw. "He left us there. Said he would find help. But I know now. He meant to leave us. Me and my boys." Weston nodded slowly. "I believe you." She stared into the fire. "I stayed because I thought he would come back. Some men do not deserve the women who believe in them." Her throat tightened. He watched her a moment longer, then stood and brought 2 more blankets. You need to sleep. Where will you sleep? Right here by the door. You and the boys take the bed. I cannot take your bed. Yes, you can. I do not want thanks. I want you to rest. That is all. She looked at him, and something inside her, something that had been locked up tight, shifted. Just a little. She reached out and touched his wrist. Thank you, Weston. He nodded once and stood quietly, then turned away to give her space. That night, as the firelight flickered on the walls, Rowena lay between her 2 sons while Weston sat by the door, his rifle across his lap. The wind outside shook the shutters, but in the cabin it was warm. And for the first time in a long, long while, she slept. When morning came, Weston was already cooking cornmeal cakes. He looked up when she stirred and gave a short nod. Boys are still sleeping. They will be hungry when they wake. She sat up, her body aching but stronger. I want to help, she said. You already did. You kept them alive. Her eyes filled and she turned away quickly. I was afraid, she whispered. I thought I was not strong enough. You were stronger than most. He handed her a tin plate, then sat beside her, close but not too close. For a while they ate in silence. Finally, he said, You can stay here as long as you need. No rush. No pressure. I have nowhere else. Then this is your place now. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just the man who had saved her, but something else, something steady and true. Why are you alone out here? She asked. He looked into the fire. Lost someone once. A girl I thought I would marry. After that, I started moving west. Built this place. Figured I would stay until I found a reason not to. She was quiet for a long time. Then, softly, maybe you just found one. His eyes met hers and something passed between them. Quiet and real. He reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. Maybe I did, he said. And outside, the sun rose over the canyon. Rowena stood beneath the cottonwood trees behind the cabin, her skirts caught in the breeze, a tin basin in her hands. The boys were napping inside, their bellies full from the morning's meal. Weston had given her space that day, disappearing into the woods with his tools and a coil of rope, leaving her with the silence of leaves and birdsong. She scrubbed the boys' shirts against the washboard, her fingers raw but her breath steady. It had been days since she'd had anything to do with her hands besides holding her children or praying into the dirt. Here, the rhythm of work settled her. When Weston returned, he came carrying 2 cedar poles and a bundle of canvas. He didn't interrupt her washing, only nodded once, then set to work beside the shed. His sleeves rolled to the elbow. She watched from the corner of her eye as he dug 2 holes and fitted the poles into place, tamping the earth down firm with the handle of his axe. What's that for? She asked when she finished rinsing the shirts and wrung the water out with her palms. Was thinking the boys could use some shade to play under. Canvas'll stretch across, he said without looking up. They're healing fast. Won't want to be inside forever. Her throat tightened. You didn't have to do all that. I know. She hung the shirts on the line between 2 trees, the fabric fluttering like flags. When she turned back, he was tying off the last corner of the canvas. It cast a soft shadow on the ground, wide enough for both boys to lie under come midday. She stepped closer. You build things quiet. Always working, never saying much. He shrugged. I talk when there's something worth saying. What about before you came west? She asked. What did you build back then? He hesitated, then wiped his hands on a rag. Barns mostly. Corrals. Worked for a man near Abilene. He taught me to square a frame without needing to measure twice. Said a man ought to feel balance in his bones. She studied him. You miss it? No. Texas was all dust and noise. I like the hush here better. She glanced toward the ridge. I don't know how to feel hush anymore. Even when it's quiet, something inside me's still screaming. He didn't flinch. You don't have to hush it. You just have to survive it. I don't want to just survive. He looked at her then, steady and sure. Then don't. She walked past him and sat beneath the canvas he'd stretched. The ground was soft beneath the woven mat he'd laid out. She folded her hands in her lap. Do you think they'll remember this? The canyon. Their father leaving. They might, he said, joining her in the shade. But they'll remember more what came after. Children hold onto the hands that carried them out. Rowena turned her head toward him. I don't know who I am anymore without him. He didn't rush to fill the silence. When he did speak, his voice was low. You're whoever you decide to be now. She was quiet for a long time. My mother used to say women are like riverbeds. We carry the floods, but we shape them too. Weston nodded. Sounds like a woman who knew something. She died when I was 19. Before Warren was born. He looked at her with something softer than sympathy. You were young. I still am, she said. But I feel old. He leaned back on his palms. I think you're just tired. That night, after the boys had eaten and drifted off on their cot, Rowena stood by the window. The moonlight pooled on the floorboards, pale and still. Weston was outside, stacking kindling for the morning. She opened the door. Do you ever miss being around others? He didn't turn. I've known enough men who talk just to hear their own voices. I'd rather have one person to sit quiet with than 10 who never know when to stop. She stepped onto the porch, arms wrapped around her waist. I used to think I needed more. A town. A busy street. People who'd see me and wave like they knew me. You could still have that, he said, placing the last piece of wood. I don't want it now. Not if it means pretending I'm someone I'm not. He stood and faced her. You're not pretending here. No, she whispered. I'm not. The porch creaked beneath his step as he joined her. He didn't reach for her, but the space between them was smaller than it had been. The sky stretched wide above them, stars sharp and countless. She tilted her head toward him. You said you lost someone. I did. Do you think you could ever let someone else in? He didn't look away. I ain't sure when it happened, but I already have. She didn't answer right away. The wind moved through the grass like breath. I want to stay, she said. Not just for a while. I want to build something that lasts. His voice was quiet. Then we'll start there. And in the silence that followed, something settled between them. No sudden thunder, no firework crack, just the steady presence of two people choosing not to run from the wreckage they carried. Inside, the boys stirred and Rowena turned toward the sound. I'll check on them, she said. He nodded, his eyes holding hers a moment longer. I'll be here. The first rain came 5 days after Rowena decided to stay. It wasn't a wild storm, just a soft, steady hush that soaked the earth and filled the air with the smell of crushed sage and damp cedar. Weston had already hung extra canvas along the porch rails and Rowena had pulled the cot closer to the hearth so the boys could stay warm without waking. She sat at the table sewing a patch into Wyatt's trousers. The needle moved slow, her fingers weren't as sure as they'd once been. Weston was near the door, mending a broken stirrup against his knee. I've been thinking, she said, not looking up. There's a schoolhouse in Pine Creek, maybe 8 miles east. He set the stirrup down. You want the boys to go? Not yet, but I want them to have the chance. I want them to grow up knowing more than riding trails and watching for signs of trouble. He leaned back in the chair, arms folded. You'd take them all that way once the time comes? If I had a mule or a wagon, I would. I've got a cart frame I haven't used in over a year. Wheels still good. She met his eyes. Why haven't you used it? Didn't have anyone to haul? They were quiet for a moment. The rain tapped gently on the roof. I used to read every night, she said. Back when things were different. We had a Bible and my mother's poetry book. I don't know where they ended up. Weston stood and walked to the shelf above the hearth. He pulled down a small bundle wrapped in oilskin and placed it on the table. Found this at a trader's post last winter. Didn't know why I bought it. She unwrapped the cloth slowly. Inside were 3 books, worn and faded but whole. One was a collection of folk tales, another an almanac, and the last was a thin volume of verse. Her fingers trembled as she touched the cover. You kept these all this time? Didn't have a reason to let them go. She opened the poetry book to a random page and read the first few lines silently. When she looked up, her eyes were damp. I didn't think anyone would ever give me something again, not something chosen. Weston didn't answer right away. He pulled a length of twine from his pocket and began rewrapping the oilskin. I don't do things halfway, he said at last. If I give something, it means it's yours. That night, after the boys had settled and the fire burned low, Rowena stood beneath the porch overhang watching the rain fall in silver threads. Weston joined her, holding 2 tin mugs of chamomile tea. Hard to believe there's green under all that dust, she said. It'll come up fast after this. She took the mug and sipped. I used to think I'd never see anything grow again. Not after what he did. Weston didn't move, but his voice was steady. You don't have to talk about him. I want to. Not for him, for me. She set her mug down on the rail. Clive wasn't always cruel. At first, he was just restless. Couldn't stay put, couldn't finish a job. He'd disappear for days, come back with stories that never quite matched. I told myself he was just chasing something. You tried to believe in him. I did. Even when he got mean. Even when he started lying more than he told the truth. Weston waited. The last time he left, she said. He told me I was the one holding him back, that I made him feel small. And then I watched him ride away, and I still waited. Like a fool. You're no fool, Weston said. You're a woman who gave more than she got. She turned toward him. I don't want to be that kind of woman again. Then don't be. You're not the same person now. No, she said, voice quiet. I'm not. The rain slowed to a mist. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called once. I want to plant something, she said. Come spring. Beans, maybe? Or squash. Something that stays rooted. I'll help you dig the beds. She looked over at him, her expression unreadable. Why are you doing this? He didn't hesitate. Because I see you. She stepped closer, close enough that her shoulder brushed against his. I see you too, Weston. He reached for her hand, slow and certain, and she let him take it. They stood like that for a long time, fingers laced, rain soft on the roof above them, the world quiet but full. Inside, the firelight danced on the walls. The boys slept soundly, their breaths even, their limbs sprawled in peace. In the hush of that porch, something took root between them, not sudden, not loud, but steady. Like the first green after rain. Morning light filtered through the window, catching on dust motes drifting above the wooden floor. Rowena sat at the table with a shallow bowl of flour and water, her sleeves rolled past her elbows. She worked the dough in quiet rhythm, her fingers moving with practiced care. Weston stood at the hearth, feeding kindling into the stove, his back warm with the fire's glow. Warren and Wyatt were outside, wrapped in wool shawls Weston had found in the loft. They were gathering pine cones beneath the trees, their laughter faint through the walls. The air had turned sharp with autumn, and the frost clung longer each morning. Rowena glanced toward the window. They're stronger every day. Boys heal quicker than most, Weston said. The world hasn't taught them to carry weight yet. They've seen more than they should, she said, wiping flour from her wrist. They'll carry it different than you did. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a small tin from the shelf and scattered salt into the dough. I want to give them something steady, a life that doesn't shift under their feet. Weston turned from the stove, his expression unreadable. You're building it already. She folded the dough in on itself once more. There's a man in Pine Creek, Ethan Gerald. He used to ride with Clive before we married. If he's still in town, he'll spread word I'm alive. He'll say what he wants to say, Weston replied. But you're not bound to his version. I don't want my boys growing up under someone else's story. You won't let them. He paused. If it helps, I can ride to Pine Creek. Ask about Gerald. Quiet-like. Rowena looked over at him, her hands still in the dough. Would you? If it sets your mind right. She nodded once, not trusting her voice. Later that morning, Weston saddled his gelding while Rowena packed a cloth of dried apples and bread into his saddlebag. Wyatt clung to her skirts, but Warren helped loop the strap closed, his small hands moving with growing confidence. Weston looked to her before mounting. If I don't find Gerald, I'll ask no further. If you do, she asked, then I'll listen. I won't act unless you ask me to. She studied his face, the way he waited without pressure. Then she reached up and touched his hand where it rested on the saddle horn. Be careful. I always am. He rode out with the sun low behind him, dust rising in his wake. Rowena watched until the trees took him from sight. That afternoon, she and the boys gathered firewood along the creek. Wyatt rode on her back, arms wrapped tight around her neck, while Warren carried a bundle of twigs, proud as any scout. The wind tugged at their clothes, and the smell of river clay clung to their boots. At the edge of the water, Rowena stopped and set Wyatt down. She knelt beside the stream and ran her fingers through the cold current. The trees here lean low, their leaves beginning to yellow. Is this where we'll stay forever? Warren asked, crouching beside her. She looked at him, startled by the question. Would you want that? He shrugged. I like the trees. And the fire. And Mr. Whitlow. She drew a slow breath. I do too. He plucked a pebble from the water and tossed it. It skipped twice before sinking. Is he gonna be my new pa? She didn't answer right away. That's not something we decide fast. But he's kind to us. That matters. Warren nodded like he understood more than he should. He doesn't yell. No, she said softly. He doesn't. They returned to the cabin with their arms full. She set the boys to stacking the wood while she prepared a pot of beans on the stove. The sky darkened early, clouds low and heavy with promise. By the time Weston returned, the first flakes of snow were falling. He stepped inside, brushing his coat clean, his face flushed from wind. You were right, he said. She stood by the stove, her eyes steady. Gerald? He's there. Runs goods between the mine camps and the town saloon. Asked if I'd heard of a woman named Langley gone missing. Claimed you'd vanished in the night. Rowena's jaw tightened. Of course he did. I told him nothing. But he's watching. He'll keep spinning lies if it suits him. She stirred the pot in silence. Truth's not always louder. But it lasts longer. Weston stepped closer. You want me to go back? No, she said. Let him talk. I've got my hands full with what's real. He nodded once. Then I'll keep to the ridge. Watch the trail if he comes sniffing. She turned to him, something new in her expression. You always do more than I ask. I don't know any other way to care for what matters. She didn't speak, but her hand found his. She laced her fingers through his and held. That night, after the boys had fallen asleep beneath a quilt she'd mended with her own thread, Rowena stepped onto the porch. Weston joined her without needing to be called. The snow had come soft and steady, blanketing the trees in white. The world was hushed again, but this time it didn't feel hollow. I used to think love was something loud, she said, all fire and flash. But this, she didn't finish it, but Weston understood. He took her hand again, just as he had before, only now there was no hesitation. This is the kind that stays, he said. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. The weight of her past did not vanish, but it eased. And around them, the snow fell quiet and clean, covering the tracks behind them, leaving only the path ahead. By late November, the land had stiffened with frost and the creek behind the cabin slowed to a crawl beneath a thin crust of ice. Rowena stood beside the root cellar, apron dusted with flour, while Weston finished driving the last stake into the garden plot they'd cleared. The soil would sleep through winter, but they'd marked the rows anyway, as if naming what would come made its growing more certain. She carried the memory of her mother's garden in her movements, how the beds were always straight, how the rows curved like ribs. Weston didn't ask why she insisted on laying it out now, before the thaw. He only helped her string twine between the stakes, his gloves rough with earth. You ever plant anything before? She asked, tying off the last corner. Corn once in Kansas. It came up crooked, but we ate it anyway. We'll do better, she said. I think this place wants to grow. He glanced over the plot, then at her. You talk like the land listens. It does. Inside, Wyatt's voice climbed in high bursts as he and Warren worked at carving shapes into a piece of bark with Weston's old penknife. They sat near the fire, careful with their tools, the way Weston had shown them. The cabin had changed in small ways: more shelves, a second cot, a rug Rowena had woven from scrap cloth. It looked like people lived there now. People who planned to stay. That evening she found Weston patching the roof of the shed, shoulders hunched against the cold. She stood below, hands tucked beneath her shawl, watching the slow, deliberate swing of his hammer. "You don't stop," she said. He looked down, eyes catching hers with quiet ease. "Not when something needs fixing." She stepped closer. "Something's been on your mind." He crouched, balancing on the joist. "There's a man in Pine Creek named Porter. He's got a smithy and a mind for proper work. I asked if he'd take me on part-time through winter." Her breath caught. "You were going to leave?" "No," he said quickly. "Just ride in twice a week. Earn coin. Enough to get the boys' boots that fit come spring. Maybe build on a second room." She swallowed. "You should have told me sooner. I didn't want you thinking I was looking to run. I wouldn't have thought that." He climbed down the ladder, every movement sure. When he reached her, he set the hammer aside and rubbed his palms together. "I've been alone a long time, Rowena. I'm learning how to be part of something again." "So am I," she said. He took her face gently in one hand, thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Then let's keep learning together." She nodded, heartful. "We've already begun." The following week, Weston rode to Pine Creek as planned. Rowena watched him go with a quiet peace in her chest, the kind that didn't twist with fear. She knew he'd return. While he was gone, she taught the boys letters using charcoal and a scrap of canvas, guided their fingers along the shapes until they could trace them without looking down. When Weston came home that evening, he brought a sack of oats, a spool of thread, and a carved wooden whistle for Warren that made Wyatt jealous until Weston pulled a second from his pocket. "I told Porter I'd only take the job if he paid me partly in trade," Weston said, setting the sack down. Rowena smiled. "You bartered for music?" "For peace and quiet," he said, and Warren promptly blew the whistle sharp into the rafters. That night, after the boys had drifted off, Rowena and Weston sat by the hearth, knees touching beneath the table. She lit a beeswax taper, its glow softening the rough edges of his jaw. "I never asked what you want," Weston said suddenly. "Not just for the boys, but for yourself." She traced a finger along the rim of her cup. "To be seen for who I am now, not who I was before." "You are," he said. "Every day. I want to marry you." He didn't speak for a moment, only watched her with that same stillness he always carried. "You were the one I was waiting for," he said, "even when I didn't know it." They married on the last Sunday of December beneath a stand of bare cottonwoods where the snow lay undisturbed. The preacher came up from Pine Creek with a Bible, and the boys wore matching vests Rowena had sewn from Weston's old coat. The vows were spoken quiet and clear, with no one else to witness but the wind and the trees and the lives they'd already begun to bind together. They returned to the cabin as dusk settled, the fire already lit and stew warming on the stove. Weston carried Wyatt, who'd fallen asleep against his shoulder, and Rowena held Warren's hand as they walked the familiar path home. That night, she lay beside Weston in the bed they now shared, her head tucked against his chest, his arm firm around her waist. "I don't feel afraid anymore," she whispered. "You don't have to," he said. "I used to think love was something earned by suffering." He kissed her hair. "It's not. It's something you build." They fell asleep like that, warm beneath wool and cotton, the quiet of the land wrapped around them like a blessing. Years passed. The garden bloomed each spring, first with squash, then corn, then late beans. Weston built a second room and then a third, and the cabin became a house with a porch wide enough for 4 rocking chairs. Warren and Wyatt grew tall and sure, their hands calloused from chores, their minds sharp with lessons learned at the schoolhouse Rowena helped reopen. She taught reading to half the valley by the time the boys were nearly grown. Weston still rode into town twice a week, but always came home before dark. They danced once a month in the barn behind the chapel, and he held her the same way every time, like she was the only thing in the world that made him still. They never spoke of Clive again. There was no need. The past had loosened its hold, and what remained was only what they'd chosen to keep. One summer evening, as the sun slipped low over the hills and the fields turned gold, Rowena stood at the edge of the porch, her hand cradling Weston's. The boys were down at the creek, laughing as they tried to catch trout with their boots. She turned to him. We made something good. He squeezed her hand. We did more than that. They stood in the light of the life they'd built, and the world around them was quiet, not from emptiness, but from peace. And they never left it.